I'm all about all things green, all things local, and have been for the past couple of years looking at various different ways that green space is valuable to us in various different ways. But I'm here today actually to ask you as many questions as I'm sure you would like to ask me, because I don't want to stand in front of you, espouse high-level government policy and then wander off. Sorry, I want to have a conversation with you. I want to learn from you. I want to know what is going wrong, what is going right, and how can we make this better. I'm not an expert in parks and urban green spaces. I'm not. I'm an expert, allegedly, in understanding the problems in practice and understanding the unintended consequences around law and policy. And that is why I'm really here today. So I come with open arms and open ears, but there is a moment of opportunity here. And I think the moment of opportunity that we've all seen through the COVID pandemic and how much people have used parks and green spaces as their haven, as their sanctuary. They have no longer bustled through trying to get to the tube station or cut through to get somewhere else. They've stopped, they've paused and they've reflected. And that love for the parks that we've seen, I know we've seen an increase in volunteers coming in and wanting to be part of that. There is a moment that we can work together and capitalise on that interest from the public. And not just for parks, but also linking into our wider governmental objectives. We know there are clear health benefits. We have plenty of evidence, a lot produced from people in this room, so thank you. But we've seen that there is a clear link between time spent in parks and receiving of health benefits. So the Fields and Trust report, which is a fantastic review, that's estimated we save £111 million per year in saved GP visits. That's not necessarily the same figure that we get from green social prescribing, which is a whole new benefit. That is just one thing that we say, by being outside more in your local park, we've got that economic benefit. So as we recover from the pandemic, both economically and socially, this opportunity that I speak of to capitalise on that societal interest and reimagine parks not just as an essential public service, but as the solution. And the solution to two of the biggest challenges that I face in my day-to-day job, but also I would argue the two biggest governmental objectives that we have: climate change and levelling up. The question I'm going to pose at the end is, how do we do it together? So climate change. We are at a really timely moment, and consciously standing on the heritage of where I am, speaking about climate change feels very apt. Because as we're approaching COP26, the UK's position as a global leader on climate change has been brought into sharp focus. So in 2019, we became the first G7 country to put into law the ambition to be net zero by 2050. The sixth carbon budget is now also enshrined in law, proposing a target that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 78% by 2035 compared with 1990 levels. And at a local level, local authorities have taken up that challenge. 2/3 have set local targets for reducing their direct emissions to net zero by 2030, beating central governments. And 1/3 have set targets for their wider areas. Against this backdrop, climate change, and I mean both mitigation and adaptation here, requires radical actions taken by individuals and communities. We are going to have to adopt different ways of heating our homes, of travelling to places, and to make the changes to the natural environment which reduce carbon from the atmosphere. And we need people to become more comfortable and familiar with these actions. So we need spaces where people can come together and see how heat pumps work, to have safe, convenient passages to walk or cycle through, and to be exposed to the power and the beauty of biodiverse planting, whilst contributing to the cooling of the urban environment. We need parks as our solution to climate change today. They not only provide the spaces for such initiatives, but they also have similar barriers to address. So we know there are many challenges in tackling climate change at the local level. We know there are problems for local authorities in understanding what to do. We know that there are issues over clarity of ask from central government. We know there are issues over funding and consistency of funding. And we know there are problems with capacity and capability. We are working on these barriers through the lens of climate change. If we can reconfigure parks as part of the solution, the desire to address quite similar barriers that I have heard from people in this room for the park sector become able to be captured in that conversation around climate change. This isn't just about more money, although I know that would be nice. This is about reimagining what parks do and can do beyond providing the spaces for work, rest and play, which they already do, and provide that beacon for the future right in the heart of urban communities. But climate change is not our only aim. We want to level up parts of the country. Now, I am not a politician. I am just an official, so I am not going to colour that phrase at all. All I will say is that to me, as an official, this principle is why I came to work as a public servant. It, to me, is about the fair distribution of opportunity. And that principle excites me. And while we are at a turning point as a department, having it front and centre in our name with a Secretary of State who has delivered, perhaps sometimes we wish he hadn't, but he has delivered fantastic changes, is a real opportunity. So for parks, I was struck by the statistic from ONS, which said that 1 in 8 households have no access to the outdoors. This rises to 1 in 5 households in London, which is easily the highest percentage of region or country of Great Britain. The next highest is Scotland at 13%. In England, black people are nearly 4 times as likely as white people to have no access to an outdoor space at home, whether that's a private or shared garden, a patio or a balcony. Parks are our community gardens. They provide that outdoor space to those communities by enabling people to have access to the outdoors and all the benefits it brings. However, we're interested in thinking about going further. Levelling up goes hand in hand with regenerations and development, and I have been inspired by the work going on in Stockton-on-Tees to reimagine their town centre, not of shops, not of a high street, but of a park, as a destination point for communities to come to congregate and serve as the focal point for community identity. Parks can be the very seeds of regeneration and a physical example of what levelling up means on a community level. So if we agree that parks are the solution, are the very pinnacles of the 2 of our biggest aims, we need to be honest and we need to address the problems. I saw during the Easter bank holiday the rubbish that was left behind. Good weather when the pubs were shut and lockdown was still on but gently lifting. I heard the problems that park managers face, the drunken behaviour, the antisocial behaviour, with staff and volunteers doing sterling jobs to manage what they could in a very difficult situation. And I said that we have 3 barriers: clarity of ask, consistency of funding, capacity. If we are to reimagine parks for the future, to rethink our urban green spaces, we have some questions to pose ourselves at quite foundational levels first. Where should parks sit? Who should manage them? Which department should be responsible for them? What changes can we make in the way that we speak about parks as public services, as the value that they have? Are they assets? Are they liabilities? What is working and what is not working? As I said at the start, I'm here to ask you exactly those questions. So it seems apt, MC, if I stop there and invite the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly. And as a local resident of Colville, which has been through some immense challenges over the past 30 years, this actually is a classic example of turning a town around. The opinion of Colville residents, including myself, is that this is not a nice place to live until this park was opened. And all of a sudden, everyone had a very different opinion of where they lived. And it's out there, you'll see it when you go round. Everyone goes, wow, isn't this a nice place to live? And that's changed only because of this very park. So a perfect example of building up. So sorry, is there any questions for Polly? There must be lots. Gentleman down there.
Yeah, fully support everything that you say. How do you persuade your local authority?
Oh, you don't start me off easy, do you? How do I persuade my central government as well, you know? I think evidence, data, momentum is something that is hard to get going, but very easy to join. And I think kind of recent successes of No Mow May. So kind of 10, 15 years ago, the idea that you would leave your verges completely left to grow was very much unheard of. Now in pockets of places it's been much more successful, and more local authorities are convinced with allowing actions such as that, of exploring actions and building that momentum. Now that's a small example. Investing in a place like this is very, very different. But I think it's the shift in psyche is the hardest part, actually. And the more that we have conferences like this, and we have talks and working together and bringing in different charities, bringing in different groups, different sector experts, and say this is a no-brainer, you will be left behind if you don't jump on this. That's the way that I think we do it. But it's not easy, of course it's not. But that would be my response.
Sorry. Any more questions? Sorry, we'll put her in the cupboard. We'll keep her now. She can't go back to government. Question about there.
Given the importance you put on parks, surely the first step is making parks and green spaces a statutory service that local authorities provide in the same vein that children's services, social services are.
Thank you. I'm really glad you asked that question, because that was something I was going to, just randomly grab someone at lunch. So this is amazing. So I think let's have the conversation. Previously, we are very concerned with putting too many statutory duties on local authorities. And we're very concerned at the implications of that. So while in one way we've got new burdens funding, and so the statutory duty is always part of that conversation, in other ways we are going to audit and report and monitor. And actually not having a statutory duty enables local authorities to know what's best placed for their area. The other issue, and I think particularly prevalent now, is what do we mean by park? And because it's tricky is not a good enough answer as to why we shouldn't do something. I'm certainly not saying that. But actually, if we start thinking about, well, where would we divide the line up? Is it that we should say some things are statutory service? Do we do it by frequency of use, etc., etc.? And that's not to say, like I say, we shouldn't have that conversation. But I think that is a real challenge when you start looking in practice what that would mean for local authorities. But if you're all saying to me you should look at it, let's have the conversation. I'll go back in my cupboard.
Any more questions? Yes, at the back there.
Thank you very much. I totally get the point, and I totally subscribe to what you say, Polly, which is the fair distribution of opportunity. Yet we have known since Cave Space did all the work 10, 12 years ago, that access to quality green space it's not equitable at all. And Paul would back that up from a green plan perspective, that Fields in Trust focus a lot on access to quantity of green space, but you can have hectares of rubbish on your doorstep. It's not about it. So I think we've got an issue with access to quality green space. And the second point is also it's the regional disparity, levelling up. We know from the work that APSI have done, the work that was done in State UK Parks in 2016, that the regional distribution of cuts has not been equal. That areas like the North West and North East and Yorkshire and Humber have had the biggest cuts of any. So how can levelling up through green space start to address that?
Okay, so I completely agree about the quality of green space, and I do think it's in many ways often easier to talk about quantity, and it means that you don't have to look at the safety issues, the environmental quality of the green spaces that we've got. So we now regularly speak and talk about quality of green spaces when I'm working with colleagues with DEFRA and in Natural England. I think you make a really good point about the disparity of regions. For me, it means that we need to prioritise parks in those areas, and we need to look at the issues that are going on which can be fixed too, as my response to the first question, to build that momentum to bring others with. I work on one policy area. I mean, it's climate change environment, fairly sizable, but there are lots of players in this conversation, and let's be honest, Whitehall's really siloed. One of my jobs is making sure everybody's in the room listening and hearing that point that you have just made, to make sure that where we do prioritise our actions, it starts in the right place. Chris said to me a little while ago about the model in 2005, I think, about start with a park and linking with regeneration. And I just can't come away from that phrase. I really can't. And that to me is what I want to be thinking about with using levelling up as the agenda to drive that one forward. So basically, I agree, Ian.
I suppose the follow-on to that is, how do we as a sector support you? Because you're one individual within a huge organisation. What is it we can collectively do in terms of supporting what you do, and what can we do to try and bring DEFRA and Natural England more into line with what's needed in urban areas as well?
I think keep doing what you're doing. As I have the mic, I need to thank many of you who've spoken to me, who've brought me up to speed, who've let me in and been so kind and so generous. It must be so absolutely frustrating to have another policy official come in and say, "Oh, tell me about parks." But you've never shown it. You've all been incredibly kind and shown research and evidence and been enthusiastic and been critical. And that's what I think the sector needs to do. It does need to join. We need to work together, which I think is genuinely very, very powerful. It's absolutely what the forum's about. Using information as a way to unlock. We will continue to have slightly more specific questions, and I think that would be a really helpful way that everyone here can help us with. Case studies. This is wonderful. We need to have a conversation over lunch about the work that you've done here to turn this around into such a wonderful place. We need to know costings. We need to know really how difficult it is on the ground, and actually where are there benefits, where are there innovation already happening, where are there partnerships working. Tell us about that, and that I think is how we can bring folks together to get us working on the same direction.
Time for one more question, if there's one more burning question out there. Gentleman across there.
Yeah, parks, there's so many conflicting demands on them when you're managing them. There's increasingly pressures for carbon offsetting, there's BMX and youth facilities, some of them have got archaeology on them, there's pressure, massive pressure for more grassroots football, cricket, increasingly with the climate change, more pressure for tree planting and carbon offsetting. More pressure for areas for dogs. Only this week we've been talking to people about horse riding because the roads are becoming so busy. So there's play, picnicking events. The pressures are massive, and trying to manage all those conflicting things, it almost feels like there really isn't enough green space and enough parks, even though we've got quite a lot in the city where I work, you know, and it's about trying to create that capacity. And I wonder if there's any thing as part of the planning process to kind of create, you know, more green spaces when new developments are being put in, and try to expand the space available to people. Because as we move into the sort of era where climate change is more significant, it would seem that people are going to have to kind of spend more leisure time, more of the leisure time locally, and the demand on parks, I think, is only going to increase and increase. And as I say, there's so many conflicting pressures on them that you really feel, it almost feels like you need more capacity and more space, really.
Thank you. That's really interesting. So on the planning points, we've recently published the National Model Design Code. I always have to think about making sure those words are in the right order, which says just that says when you're thinking about developments, urban green spaces need to be central to it. And the planning reforms, well, it's paused at the minute. I can't get into trouble and tell you anything because I genuinely don't know. We'll kind of look and address some of those issues. What I'm really interested in, though, is your use of the word pressures, because I think that we've described the same thing, but I said opportunities, whereas you've described them as pressures. And I'm interested in thinking about why that is. You said it's a capacity issue. Is there something about the way that we reframe that and say, look, parks are being the answer to all of these different things that you have asked us to do, and therefore to do those things, we are going to need X. To reframe it, basically, as a way to say that we are answering these problems as opposed to the concerns that I have heard previously. Also interesting to hear that you think demand will continue to rise, which to me I think strengthens the argument that we've got for making sure that the parks and urban green spaces are the forefront of policy and policymakers' minds, because if you are increasing use, increasing societal interests, and increasingly ticking every box, then you've got a winning argument right there.
Thank you, Polly.
Thank you, everyone. I'm really happy to continue talking, so please do email me and grab me at lunch. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly.